Southern Africa is particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Yet over the past 3 decades, the continent has received less than 4% of climate-related research funding. And even then, most of this funding goes to institutions in Europe and North America. Our survival ultimately depends on our ability to adapt to a changing world. How are we set to fare in Southern Africa? Climate change isn't a problem for the future. Research shows that the region is already buckling under the pressure of extreme weather. Professor Midgley is the director of the School of Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University. He joins us now. Professor, thank you so much for your time. At the beginning of my intro, I said that Southern Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is particularly vulnerable to climate change. Explain why we are more vulnerable than the rest of the world.
Well, partly it's a function of our climate, that the African continent straddles the tropics, and we have 2 arid zones in North and Southern Africa. So we set up for a high climate risk. And indeed, what we've seen is that agricultural productivity growth has been reduced by about 1/3 since 1961 by climate change. So already we are seeing a serious impact of climate change on our potential to grow our food security. And so this is not a theoretical issue. This is something that has hit us already. And it's very urgent that we start to put in place the kind of technology and skills to allow our governments and our people to adapt.
Why is there a lack of research on the impact of climate change from an African perspective, particularly, and how we would mitigate that? Is it that there's a lack of funding, a lack of interest from Africans?
It's definitely not a lack of interest, but I do think that this kind of research can be expensive. It doesn't have to be very expensive, but it does depend on a very active network of scientists who support one another. And so I think research funding into the institutional strength in this region would really add value. We lose a lot of our best scientists to greener pastures. You said that only 4% of the funding comes to Africa. Well, that means that 96% is going elsewhere, and that's attracting away our best scientists. So we need to, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. We need to build up our capacity so that we can attract more funding and indeed get our own governments to fund more. And then we will retain scientists, become more visible, and be able to address this challenge. But we need to build our institutions, really do that very deliberately.
Yeah, you say we need to improve our capacity. What does that involve? Is that an infrastructure issue? Is that a human resource issue? And what is it, from a research perspective, that we still need to find out that's crucial for us to know from here on out?
Oh gosh, there are many things. If you look at the latest IPCC report and the kind of risks that are being highlighted, we have risks in food production, food security, water, in fisheries, in urban settlements, sea level rise, human health, the risk from heat waves, and these are all risks that aren't simple. They involve multiple sectors. They require complex research, and they require researchers to work across disciplines. And that's very difficult. We're even struggling to fund disciplinary research. So this is why it's so difficult and why it's so important. Africa does have skills in these areas. You know, the recent report of IPCC does show that. It's one of the best regional reports of the latest IPCC series. It's a very impressive piece of work, but it's scrounging around for data, and we need to really improve that situation. So we've got to build our skills and push more good scientists into this field to support our political people who do the negotiations on this funding, and develop a stronger African voice. Otherwise, our agenda will be driven by the global north, because that is where all the science is being done.
How big is the African contingent when it comes to climate change research? I know you are part of, I think, the top 1,000 scientists in climate change. How many other Africans are there in that grouping?
Yeah, well, of the top 1,000, only 4 are African. And I think only 2 are African born. So it's a very, very tiny fraction. And, there are many reasons for that. There are many, many reasons for that. It's quite a tough field to be in. And, I have the advantage of being a native English speaker. And, it's thus easier for me to break into some of those networks. But that doesn't mean that African scientists and African leaders haven't made it in these international spheres. We have many, many good examples of that. But we need to improve that. For example, I don't know if you know, but one of the biggest stores of carbon on the planet is in African tropical forests. It's 30 billion tons of carbon are sitting in peatlands. That's 3 years worth of emissions. But who discovered that? Scientists from Oxford. Really, we have a continent that is a remarkable one, and it really, really behooves us to invest more in understanding our own continent. It will pay us dividends for decades.
Absolutely understood, 100%. Prof, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Professor Guy Midgley of Stellenbosch University.